To close out Summer of Prog, we have another fan contribution, Tubular Bells by Mike Oldfield. Huge thank you for donating this copy. And while Breakfast in America may have been a bit too poppy for Summer of Prog, side note, R.I.P. Rick Davies, this album is anything but. Tubular Bells is two sidelong, mostly instrumental pieces, essentially performed by one man, Mike Oldfield, who, by the way, was 19 when he recorded this. Feel old yet? In fact, when I was a 19-year-old aspiring musician, I bought this album on CD and was mesmerized by it. I was already into Pink Floyd, so it wasn't too esoteric for me. And like most of you, I became aware of it through a little-known horror film called The Exorcist. Yeah, this album's popularity owes everything to The Exorcist, which was like the Star Wars of its time. Lines around the block, many attempts to ban the film across the country, which of course only added to its popularity. A true phenomenon. The power of Prague compels you! The power of Prague compels you! And while Tubular Bells wasn't heavily featured in the film, it is played over the end credits, so as audiences were leaving the theater absolutely shocked by what they just saw, this haunting melody was their last association with the film. I used to include a single version of the Exorcist theme on a Halloween mix CD I made, along with Monster Mash, Ghostbusters, but of course we're only talking about a few minutes of music. Tubular Bells is a full album, and most of it is not horror-related, although some parts of it are quite unsettling, and I mean that in a good way. In fact, I'd even argue that the whole record has more of a whimsical, adventurous, and orchestral quality to it, even the theme that played in The Exorcist. I'll say right off the bat, I think this album is brilliant. All the work and recording techniques that went into it in 1973, they are not to be underestimated. But unlike all the other albums that I reviewed in Summer of Prog, this one's a little harder to review. Aside from the master of ceremonies listing the instruments, there's no lyrics. It's almost like listening to a classical piece of music if it was using rock and roll instruments and mostly played by one guy. But let's dive into it. Mike Oldfield was a child prodigy, having taken up guitar at a young age and performed with his sister Sally. At the time, Mike was working through his own demons in his head, spurred from childhood trauma and LSD, so ironically, Tubular Bells was kind of a mental exorcism in and of itself.
In a way, music was more real to me than the normal reality.
In the early 70s, he played bass for Kevin Ayers, formerly of Soft Machine. And in the meantime, he familiarized himself with studio recording techniques and different instruments.
He offered to lend me his tape recorder. It was a simple tape recorder, 2 tracks. Wow, I can make some demos with a tape recorder.
He started demoing songs which would eventually make up Tubular Bells, inspired by the short-lived band Centipede, produced by Robert Fripp. And at the time, Mike also connected with an aspiring entrepreneur named Richard Branson. Yes, that Richard Branson.
Never thought that the word Tubular Bells was going to play such an important part in our lives. Virgin going into space most likely wouldn't have existed if we hadn't hired that particular instrument.
He was already planning to form Virgin Records, and intrigued by Mike's talent, he offered him studio time at the Manor Studio in Oxfordshire, England. It does need to be noted that Mike was not the first artist to track all the instruments himself. Todd Rundgren and Stevie Wonder were already known for performing most of the instruments on their albums. And a notable influence in Mike's case, Terry Riley had recorded all the instruments on the album A Rainbow in Curved Air in 1969. Still, it was a very involved recording and overdubbing process, a lot of speed manipulation of the 16-track tapes, and it's still impressive to this day. The artwork was designed by Trevor Key, who would go on to design a number of album covers, but Tubular Bells, his first, is his most iconic. The inspiration from the famous bent metallic bell actually came from Mike hitting Tubular Bells themselves so hard during recording, with a hammer no less, that he cracked them during the performance. Talk about heavy metal. As the album begins, we hear the Exorcist theme played on a soft piano. It's a repeating motif in A minor, played in a bar of 7/8, followed by a bar of 8/8, which repeats over and over again for a long time.
It's the same old pattern here.
So already, there's no doubt we're in prog rock territory, and it's easy to see why William Friedkin chose this for The Exorcist. You can also hear where John Carpenter got the theme to Halloween, another haunting piano line in an unconventional time signature. Being somewhat inexperienced on the instrument, Mike played the piano to a metronome, which adds to the hypnotic nature of it. The theme is layered with organ, glockenspiel, a honky-tonk piano, and of course that bass. Oh my god, that bass makes it. I can listen to that counter melody all day. There's also those overdriven organ stabs that add to the intensity. It just stabs at your heart like Michael Myers' knife. Oh wait, wrong movie. The motif does start to change when a flute comes in, performed by John Field, and only when two harmonized guitars come in does the piece finally change to conventional 4/4 time, leading us out of the album's most famous section. You know, I'm amazed by Mike's ability not only to perform all these instruments, but just to have the arrangement of the piece in his head while he's recording and overdubbing. I used to do a lot of recordings on my Tascam 4-track recorder when I was a kid, overdubbing and playing all the instruments. It's kind of what started off this channel, so I can tell you from experience, this is very impressive. Once into the next section, the general public's familiarity of the piece will have ended, but it's still intriguing. It keeps that arpeggiating piano going, returning to the 15/8 time, but now in a major key and with Mike's acoustic guitar. It's a much gentler section, like you've come out of this dark tunnel, or maybe have been exorcised of the demons in your head, and come out to some open air. In fact, that fairy-like glockenspiel that follows definitely has a more whimsical fantasy feel that you might hear in a Disney movie. So Mike's just covering all the movie genres at this point. And from here on, the motifs change so frequently, it's hard to go through each and every one of them, but there are some standouts. At the 6-minute mark, we get a more driving section featuring a distorted guitar, overdriven into the recording desk, much like the Beatles' Revolution. I really love this part of the piece. The guitar is so biting, and we return to that more sinister vibe, and leads into what I call the evil section, joined by Lindsay Cooper on bowed bass. It's really cool. The opening motifs continue to return here and there for a while. I have to say the transitions are mostly pretty seamless. There's a demo of the full piece to listen to, and while most of the themes are there, you can tell Mike really honed the piece to be much more fluid. The 11-minute mark is led by softer harmonized guitars, eventually leading into what is labeled as the nasal choir, backed up by a honky-tonk piano.
That's all the kitchen staff from the manor.
At the 14-minute mark, we get what is arguably the most conventional sounding part of the piece, maybe best known outside of the opening theme. These distorted guitar chords make for a fun rock and roll riff that would be at home on Ziggy Stardust or another glam rock single. Of course, just when you think you've got a handle on it, Mike throws a pipe wrench into it by removing beats from the form. My one nitpick about this section, and a couple other sections in the first side, is I wish there were drums in it. Strangely enough, there is some percussion on the demo, mostly cymbals, but not on the final product. In later years, Mike would perform this entire first piece with a couple of drummers, and it just adds a whole new layer of dynamics to it. If you've never seen this 1981 performance at Montreux, definitely check it out. Though I would say that the drums do make it sound a little more conventional, like a standard rock and roll or fusion performance, which is great for a live rendition, but I think by not having drums on the record, it really gives Tubular Bells its own unique identity. So, kinda torn on whether I think drums would have benefited this side of the record or not, but don't worry, we will hear drums soon enough. It's near the 15-minute mark when we finally hear those tubular bells, and shortly after, we begin the piece's climactic motif. Vivian Stanshall acts as master of ceremonies, slowly introducing each instrument. Grand piano, organ, glockenspiel, bass guitar, double-speed guitar, two slightly distorted guitars, plus tubular bells.
When he said plus tubular bells and the bells hit, I was over the moon because it just sounded so perfect.
We're also joined by a girly chorus featuring Mike's sister Sally. It's almost like an angelic choir. If the Exorcist theme that introduces the piece represents the demons in Mike's head, this represents a release where he finds peace of mind. Not only is it quite a journey for the artist, it's a really fun way to end this side of the album, leaving only a classical guitar to close out the piece. It's amazing, and it goes without saying side 1 is the superior side. But let's hear what side 2 has to offer. Well, we start off with a waltzing guitar riff counterpointed by another guitar melody, all with an English folk flavor. I don't think it's going to come as a shock to anyone that side 2 isn't quite as memorable as side 1, and they don't really connect the motifs together between the two sides, not like Thick as a Brick. It's more like another movement to a symphony. Though the soothing guitar melody here is a nice contrast to the haunting piano figure from the first side, this section feels like it should score a Miyazaki film. Having some time to chill out is much needed in a dynamic piece like this. It slowly builds up to that drum beat we've been waiting for, played by Steve Broughton. So apparently Mike was being pressured to include some lead singing on the album, so he responded by going into the studio after drinking a bottle of Jameson and singing this. Yeah, apparently he hasn't exorcised those demons yet. I wonder if Mike's head is gonna spin around 360. I like that jazzy piano with plenty of guitar riffs that would have been at home on a conventional rock song. But again, I don't think an actual vocal would have been as entertaining or unique as the caveman rambling. I think it gives some much needed humor to a very complex piece. From here, we die down to an organ piece complemented with some double-speed guitar parts, which I'm hesitant to say sound impressive considering they were made through studio trickery, but they are very imaginative nonetheless. So that would make for a very somber ending if it wasn't for one more section. Yep, this is how the theme song to The Exorcist ends, with a jaunty sea shanty, The Sailor's Hornpipe. I don't know how I feel about this ending, though it is kind of fun that it speeds up faster and faster until it finally stops. So, strange ending aside, I can still say Tubular Bells is an impressive instrumental work of art. But how did this esoteric prog rock piece come to be the theme of The Exorcist? Well, for that, we once again gotta thank our old friend, Ahmet Ertegun. Atlantic pressed Tubular Bells in America, and Ahmet presented the album, among his catalog, to William Friedkin when he was looking for music for his film. Once he heard the piece, he knew it would be perfect. And the album just exploded from there. It really does hold your attention for almost 50 minutes. I would admit, it does get a little long in the second side, but to be honest, I think I find it the most interesting out of all the albums I've reviewed this summer. I mean, it may not have the intriguing storyline and lyrics that 2112 has, but it's an album that I can just put on my turntable and spin no matter what I'm doing. Admittedly, you do have to be in the right headspace to listen to Tubular Bells. I mean, obviously, some of the songs from Breakfast in America are going to be a lot more accessible, but truth be told, if I was to rank all 4 of these albums this year, I think I would put Tubular Bells at the top, just slightly above 2112. Tubular Bells gets a goldfish, definitely worth having on vinyl. Obviously, there's no essential track, I already did that joke with Thick as a Brick. If you want to find the single version for your Halloween playlist, you can definitely find that, but definitely give the full album a spin. I think you'll enjoy it. Everyone, I want to thank you so much for joining me this summer of Prog. Thank you to everybody for donating these vinyl copies. Thank you to my patrons, and thank you for watching. If you're new to this channel, please consider subscribing to my YouTube channel. I'm also on Instagram and TikTok and all those things. And believe it or not, I'm actually working on a prog rock album of my own. If you're able to, please consider signing up for my all-access Patreon tier for some exclusive content and to help me fund production of the album. And well, that's it for now, and I will see you all next time.